The desert night pressed in heavy and unrelenting. A suffocating blanket of silence broken only by the faintest of dying fires and the distant groan of twisted steel. Smoke curled in ragged spirals, rising from the charred skeletons of armored vehicles scattered across the dunes. Each wreck still smoldered like a funeral pyre, sending up sparks that drifted toward the indifferent stars above. The stench of oil and blood lingered, mixing with the dry grit of sand that bit against the skin with every gust of wind. This was no battlefield anymore. It was a graveyard, a reminder of what men and machines left behind when war burned itself out. Lieutenant Maya Ramirez moved slowly through the wreckage, her rifle cradled tight against her chest, her boots sinking softly into the sand. Her breathing was steady, practiced, but her eyes were sharp, scanning every shadow with the discipline of a soldier who had learned to distrust silence. She had been on enough campaigns to know that quiet often hid more danger than noise. Tonight, however, the quiet was absolute, oppressive in its weight, as though the desert itself held its breath. She paused beside the blackened husk of a carrier, its plating warped from an explosion that had gutted it. The wind whistled through the torn steel like a mournful flute. Something pulled her forward, an instinct deeper than training. She crouched, running her gloved hands over the scorched hatch, feeling the rough edges where fire had kissed the metal. With a grunt, she pried it open, the hinges shrieking softly, and leaned inside. The interior smelled of smoke and burnt circuitry. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across torn straps and shattered panels until it halted on something impossibly clean, impossibly untouched. A metal cassette bolted to the floor, gleaming faintly as though time and destruction had conspired to spare it. Unlike the wreckage around it, it was flawless, its edges sharp, its surface unmarred. And on its lid, carved deep into the steel, was an emblem she knew. Her pulse spiked. It was impossible, absurd, yet undeniable. That crest was not the mark of any division, any unit, any classified program she had ever been briefed on. She had seen it only once before, etched into an old photograph hidden away in her grandmother's trunk. The photograph had shown a young man in a uniform that did not match any known record, standing stiff and proud, his hand resting on the very same insignia stitched into his chest. Her grandfather. The man her family rarely spoke of, whose legacy was more shadow than memory. Maya swallowed hard, the air thick in her throat. She reached out, her fingers brushing the grooves of the crest, the cold metal biting through her gloves. Slowly, carefully, she unlatched the bolts and lifted the lid. Inside lay a sealed bundle of documents, their edges yellowed with age yet stamped with fresh, high-level classification markings. Beneath them, nestled in foam, was a data drive, a faint light pulsing within its casing like the steady heartbeat of something still alive, waiting. Her hand hovered above it, trembling not with fear, but with recognition. This was random. This was chance. This was meant for her. Lieutenant Ramirez, step away from the container. A voice snapped through the air like a whip, sharp and unyielding. Maya froze, her hand suspended above the drive, then slowly turned. Commander Hale stood in the open, his figure cast in sharp relief by the flickering fires. His sidearm was drawn, aimed squarely at her, his posture rigid with authority. He had always been a distant figure, the kind of officer who lingered in shadows during debriefings, who watched without speaking, whose eyes saw more than his words ever revealed. Now those eyes locked onto her with something colder than duty. "That's an order," Hale said, his tone low, carrying the weight of command. "You don't know what you're touching." Maya straightened, her rifle still lowered but her spine stiff. The desert wind tugged at the strands of hair that had slipped loose from her helmet. Her voice was steady, unshaken. "With respect, sir," she said, "I know exactly what I'm touching. Why does my grandfather's crest mark this container? What's inside that links him to whatever this is?" For the first time, Hale faltered. His expression tightened, his weapon wavering just slightly as if her words had struck deeper than a bullet. His jaw worked, his silence louder than any denial could have been. When he spoke, his voice carried less steel, more weight. "You were never supposed to see this," he murmured, almost to himself. Your grandfather, he wasn't who you thought he was. None of this was meant to reach you. Before she could press him further, the desert erupted in blinding light. Floodlights flared across the dunes as engines roared closer. Armored transports cresting the ridge like predators circling prey. The air vibrated with the hum of heavy machinery. Within moments, soldiers fanned out, securing the wreckage in a precise, practiced formation. And from the lead vehicle stepped men of a different caliber. Admirals. Officers whose faces she had only seen in manuals and training briefings. Whose reputations whispered through the ranks like rumors carried on smoke. They moved with deliberate calm, their metals glinting in the artificial light, their very presence bending the battlefield into a theater of judgment. One of them, tall and austere with silver hair catching the glow, approached the container. His eyes flicked briefly to Maya, lingering on her with a weight that felt more like measurement than observation. "Lieutenant Ramirez," he said, his voice deep, resonant, carrying decades of authority. "You've uncovered what should have stayed buried. That case does not hold intelligence. It holds a decision, and now it falls to you." Around her, the admirals formed a circle, their shadows long and sharp against the sand. Hale lowered his weapon fully, his silence thick with unspoken truths. The night itself seemed to hold its breath once more, as though the desert understood the gravity of this moment. Maya's fingers brushed the drive, the faint pulse of its light steady beneath her touch. Her heartbeat slowed, matching its rhythm. The fear she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, a clarity born not of training but of blood, of history rising from the shadows to claim her. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a link in a chain forged long before her birth, bound to secrets that had shaped wars in silence. The admirals watched her, waiting, their eyes as hard as the stars above. Hale stood off to the side, his face unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that almost looked like warning her, perhaps respect. Maya inhaled, steady and deliberate, the desert air dry in her lungs. Her hand pressed down on the drive, and in that instant she knew, whatever path she chose, her war was no longer about orders or commands, or even survival. It was about truth. A truth buried in ash and steel, sealed in shadows, carried through bloodlines. And as the night stretched endless around her, she understood that this was only the beginning.